Welcome to the Business Women Australia podcast show, the podcast that brings together industry leaders to discuss the latest trends, insights, and strategies. So sit back and relax. Let's get inspired by the amazing women who are shaping the future of professional women in Australia. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
So welcome to the Business Women Australia podcast show. I'm Lyn Hawkins, founding director of Business Women Australia, and I'm on the traditional lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation here in Booloo, Perth. And I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous people of this beautiful country and pay my respects to elders past, present, and those emerging. We are streaming live across LinkedIn, Meta, YouTube, and available to catch up on those platforms, as well as on Spotify and iTunes, and of course our website that houses all our recorded podcasts, our webinars, and our insight articles. I'm delighted to have my lovely friend with us today, the very talented Robyn, to share her insights and experiences in breaking down barriers, the keys to unlocking transformational leadership, growth, and balance. So Jo's very experienced in navigating change. She's had a lot of work and roles in very fast-paced tech ventures, and she's managed to find balance even in those roles in very highly demanding careers. She's worked with tech giants like Atlassian, Afterpay, and Brighte. So there is no better person for us to hear very practical advice on anything to do with business, to do with adapting businesses, about building sustainable growth, and all while pursuing personal passions and balance. A lot has happened since we came up with this topic. Jo, you've landed literally in San Francisco. It's an evening over there. This is the life of a startup. How's that going? Before we kick off in our questions, how is it?
Oh my gosh. It's kind of one of those pinch me moments, like I reckon in 10 years I'll look back on this and be like, oh my goodness, what a whirlwind. I have the absolute pleasure of being in the US at the moment with one of my clients, a female founder based out of Melbourne, Australia. She's bringing her product over to the North American market, and we've been here almost 2 weeks on the ground having conversations with prospective customers, prospective investors. And it's just been incredible to see, not only work alongside her, but watch her grow as a founder, watch her business grow, hearing this feedback directly from customers. Lyn, I just feel so grateful to be doing this and then to be able to hop on and do this podcast with you, which we've been planning for months. And so I'm just super excited that it's here.
Oh, that is awesome. And thank you to whoever the airline was that got you on time into San Francisco, into your hotel room in time to jump on.
Shout out to United Airlines.
Exactly as planned. So well done. So walk us through your approach to helping founders turn an idea into a scalable business. I mean, what are the first steps that our founders should be prioritizing?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a question that I get quite often. I'm a mentor for a number of the early stage VCs and accelerators in Sydney. The first thing that I would say is validating your idea with as many potential customers as possible. So even before you start to think about selling and pricing and how I'm going to bring this to market, just getting feedback, even if it's from friends and family first. And then I remember speaking with a founder and he had this brilliant idea, and there's obviously some bias when you're sharing your idea with friends and family. Everyone's like, oh yeah, great idea. You should definitely go after that. I'd pay for it. But once you ask someone to hand their credit card, it's a different story. So he just went and sat at a couple of cafes in his local town and started talking to people because this was a consumer app. And so obviously it's, every day the people walking around you who might be potential users of this app, and just getting feedback on what he was building, the problem that he was solving, whether that problem resonated, whether the pain points resonated. And so really that early validation is critical before you start to invest a lot of time, a lot of resources. I'm here in the US right now, and someone said to us earlier today, ideas are cheap. like ideas are floating everywhere and anywhere. It's your ability to execute. It's your credibility as someone that people can believe in. And part of that credibility comes from domain expertise and really understanding the problem statement. So that would be my first set of advice, is like validate that you're solving a problem that has a real need, and then there's a market for that.
It's one of those things that I think a lot of founders are scared about doing because they're worried about losing their IP or someone stealing an idea.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Especially with AI, like the pace at which AI is developing, and it's incredibly commoditized. It's not necessarily a valid fear, I would say. Like, I mean, unless you're hanging out in the Google office or the AWS office or the Microsoft office, you might be at risk of somebody else internally looking at your idea and thinking it's a good one to sell to the founders or to the innovation team. But again, like I said, ideas are cheap. It's really what's going to differentiate you, and a lot of that is you as an individual. Like, do you have deep subject matter expertise in that problem? The second is speed to execution. Like, you might talk about this idea with a number of other folks, but who's actually putting the pedal to the metal? Who's going to go build this, test this, get it out in market? That's going to be a real value add and a real differentiator for you. So I would say that it's not a really irrational fear. I would get over that fear. Honestly, I would talk about your idea with as many people as possible and get that feedback. Don't hold it close. The other thing I tell a lot of founders is know your strengths and then surround yourself with people that have a different skill sets than you and that can really up level you. So honestly, talking about your idea with people that might even scare you a little bit is a healthy thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think too, asking people, what about this idea would not work? Rather than just asking if people like it or whether or not they think it's great, or just say, what are the sorts of things that wouldn't work about this, or what other things are out there that I might not know about? I had someone come to me with an idea the other day, and I basically said to them, look, with these tech platforms, people can get this stuff for free, so they're not going to pay for your idea. And it was a bit of a blow to them because they didn't know that all these tech platforms, they're offering all this other stuff for free. So I said, but, it might be different if you package it in a different way, if you, test it out in the makers market to start off with and get as many people to see what kind of, price point it is, then you can work out if it's going to be a sustainable, profitable venture for you. That's the thing before you go all in.
You bring up a really good point, which is doing your research. I've seen a lot of founders, I've seen a lot of businesses that do not understand or know their competitive landscape. And it seems it's almost going back to business 101, right? Like, what's your business plan? If you look at a business plan that was probably developed, at a McAfee or an Intel or a Silicon Graphics, it's problem set, vision, problem statement. What's your solution? Who are the competitors? I really encourage founders to know their competitors and know them deeply, try their products, test their products, know why you're different. Your competitor oftentimes also is the status quo, so you can leverage that as a tailwind as well. But knowing your competitors, and even if somebody is already doing what you're doing, how can you be different? And sometimes that differentiator, again, can be your domain expertise. It could be unique access to data or customer insights. Again, it could be your speed to execution. It could even be your network. If you're really, really well networked in the space that you're selling into, that can be a huge competitive advantage to others that are, maybe they have the velocity and they have the tech velocity, but they may not have the networks to get into those customer bases.
I was even chatting to a VC group that spent a lot of money supporting, clinical trials, and they were saying a lot of those sort of clinical trial type research are often limited because they'll go for the cheaper group that will just do a validation on the existing state of play with what other companies are doing, rather than actually building their clinical trial into looking at how to take it to the next level and bring that innovation in very early. And, they've met the brief, but the brief was wrong. The brief was, focused more on how do we get our validations for these clinical trials to be accepted, by the pharmaceuticals or what have you, and have a market validation, but then it's just the same mousetrap. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, classic.
100%.
This sort of stuff at the beginning when their money is scarce are really vital decisions and can really make it difficult or easy in the long run.
Yeah, 100%. And I think something you just reminded me of is the importance of talent as well. So who you're bringing into the team is also a huge part of your competitive advantage. If you think about the things that make up IP, it's not just technology, it's not just the idea, it's the people that you have developing the technology, it's the processes. There's a lot of IP that sits around R&D from a process and from an operational perspective. Those are the things to be thinking about when you're building up a business. In the early days, it can be quite common, especially from a tech perspective, to outsource your technology because it's cheaper, it's more cost effective, you can get something out quickly, but you don't have as much of a moat in terms of, okay, what do I have that has value, that can extract value out of, aside from just my idea. So thinking about how talent plays into your strategy as well. If your example, Lyn, clinical trials, like who is on your board from a research perspective, what kind of researchers and scientists are you able to tap into, to leverage their expertise. And again, that becomes part of your package, whether it's for a fundraise perspective or a customer acquisition perspective.
Yeah, talent's an important one. And I think you mentioned earlier on quite often a founder has a deep understanding of a problem that they're solving, coming perhaps from a technical understanding, that background. But how crucial is operational excellence when it comes to scaling a business? I think we see a lot of amazing inventions and innovations that never get off the ground. It's often the scaled down Me Too version that gets commercialized quicker by a group of people that are very good at taking bits and going to market quicker.
Yeah, it's a great question and such a prevalent one. Look, in the early days, it's not as important. And I'm an operator, right? I live by efficiency and scale. In the early days, it's okay to cast a bit of a wide net, and I'm trying to identify, who is going to pay for my solution? Where is this market from a demographics perspective, from an industry perspective? For those who are new to kind of the startup world, it's ICP, right? My ideal customer profile. And your goal is to get to a sellable, repeatable product. And that's not just from a product development perspective, but that's also from an operational perspective, right? So the thinking here is, if I can sell one, I should be able to sell 100. And it's not going to completely disrupt my operations. I'm not building bespoke things left, right, and center. But in the early days, it's totally okay to, we call it the F around and find out phase. You try things and you see what sticks. But once you start to get to that, okay, we've got 20 paying customers or 50 paying customers, and we're starting to add on more folks into the team. We need to bring on customer success. We need to bring on marketing to try and land more customers. If it's a hardware technology, you're starting to think about, manufacturing and supply chain, like who are all the stakeholders that are involved in these processes? And in order to deliver the same experience to your customers, operational efficiency is incredibly important. I mean, not just from a cost optimization perspective, but from a growth perspective and from an experience perspective. So I would say it's easy to apply it to to the funding stages. If you're heading into that Series A stage, so you're probably doing somewhere between, 3 to 5 mil in annual recurring revenue, and you're starting to think about that next round of funding. For those who are located in Australia, you may be looking for that funding overseas in the US. Like, it's absolutely the right time to be not only just thinking about scale, but to have the operational efficiencies in place. We're seeing obviously the last couple of years, we've had huge shifts in the market and the macroeconomic climate. And although capital is still available and out there, we're a lot more risk averse, especially in the early stages. And so, pre-seed in the early days typically was, you have an idea, you might have a prototype, but people were willing to throw $1 to $2 million at an idea. It's not the same anymore. Investors are looking for traction. They're looking for proof points. And at that Series A round, when you're doing multi-million in revenue a year, they want to know that you have the operational structure in place so that you're ready for going after that next market segment or launching a new vertical. That it's no longer how can you double your revenue, it's how can you 10x your revenue. And in order to do that, you need to be thinking about operational efficiency.
And that's a really great sort of time. It's exciting. You've got some new folks in the team. How do you, as a founder, juggling all this activity and stress? I mean, that's a big stress, getting a 10 times growth in your business. I mean, how do you build the resilience inside your team and keep them focused on high performance while still looking after themselves?
It's such a good question, Lynn. I can speak from experience only as someone that supports founders. So I've not been a founder myself. I mean, I've founded my own practice, but it's not the same as founding my own business. And so I'll speak on behalf of founders, but it's hard, right? Building that resilience is really, really challenging. So the first thing I would say is, it's really, really important to look after yourself from a personal perspective. It's not uncommon that founders' businesses are pretty much taking a front seat in their life, sometimes at the sacrifice of time with family. And so making sure you have a really, really good support system so that you're taking care of yourself is priority number one. I think too, especially 2025, this next generation, we have a lot more, I would say, awareness around the importance of personal health and well-being, and just feeling okay to say when everything is not okay. And so I would really encourage founders to operate with a level of transparency and authenticity with their teams, no matter the size of your team. We had a founder when I was working at Black Nova who, basically was sharing with me, they were going through a really, really tough time. It was crunch time, runway was cutting a bit short. They really had some critical proof points to prove to their investors and to the market. And, they have a weekly town hall, and he came to the town hall as the CEO and said, guys, I'm not going to lie, I'm really struggling this week. And I just need you guys, I need everyone on the team to be aware that I've not lost my energy. I've not lost my vision, but it's just been a tough week for me. And the rest of the organization and the rest of the team, one, appreciated the openness and the transparency. And then two, were like, how can I be here? What can we do? What can we do? So that was kind of a long-winded way to say, make sure that you have the support system around you, but also I think the culture that you bring to the organization is so important, because how you show up every day is how your team is going to show up every day. So yes, it's, finding that resilience and finding that energy even when you don't have the time. But if you're really feeling like your battery is depleted, it's also okay not to be okay. It's just about showing the paths and how we move forward and how we tackle these challenges. And a lot of that comes down to company values. I've worked in organizations of all shapes and sizes, and it can be really challenging to keep the same values as a company grows. And Atlassian is a great example. I worked at Atlassian for almost 6 years. I joined when they were 1,000 people. They grew to 6,500 when I was there. Now they're 10,000 people, and they still really live inherently by their values. I could recite all 5 values today. We used to say them quite commonly in meetings or when we were collaborating with each other. And so I think the values also help build resilience, because it's a shared language that you have with your team. And it allows you to really relate to each other on another level. So yeah, those are a couple of ways I think about building resilience.
Yeah, we're getting some commentary across our different platforms. Thank you to our listeners for encouraging and agreeing with what Jo's saying. You know, I love that example of leading self and leaning into the vulnerability and honesty of sharing with your team where you're at and what's going on. And that gives permission then for everyone in the organisation to do the same as well. So, you know, for those of you in leadership and team management roles, it's not weak to share the truth about where you're at. It's actually really strong and powerful, and it's a really interesting example of this beautiful generational shift of leadership away from command and control to more around collaborative leadership and sharing the load. That's very powerful, and great examples there, Jo. So during your role, you know, you've made this leap to become an outsourced operating partner or a fractional COO, Chief Operating Officer. It's an interesting role, and it's kind of, I remember you really grappling with what do you call yourself, you know, when you first had this great idea that there were so many startups there that don't need or can't afford a full-time Chief Operating Officer, but that so having almost like a fractional part-time tapping into these resources is really powerful opportunity for startups and scale-ups. So how does your role work navigating these kind of transformations and scaling plans?
Yeah, it's, you know, I still struggle with what to call it. I had this conversation with somebody earlier today, actually, because he was like, COO takes such a different shape, no matter what business you're working on, no matter what leader you're working with. And he was like, what role do you play? And I said, it honestly depends on the client and the product and the customers that we serve and the business model and the team. So it's quite malleable. I call it a fractional COO, but you know, really, what I think of myself is as an extension, depending on the stage, but as an extension of the founder, an extension of the executive team. So I'm really bridging the gap between strategy and operations. A lot of times, you know, there's a book called Rocket Fuel, which I would really, really recommend if anyone hasn't read it. I listened to the audiobook. This is not a paid ad. No one pays me for sponsorship yet, but come back to me in 10 years and hopefully I'll be in a different place. The book talks about two roles in a partnership, whether it's a business partnership, whether it's an executive partnership, a visionary, and an integrator. And I am an integrator at heart. Like, I love soaking up someone's vision. I love understanding their strategy, and they feel like it's a safe pair of hands to take the so what and what's next. And that's really what I do in a nutshell. I'm translating a strategy or a vision into an execution plan. And that can be everything from how are we going to go to market? How are we going to service our customers? What is it going to cost us to get this business off the ground? What are our revenue targets and are they achievable? What are the risks that are present that might limit us from hitting that, and how do we mitigate them? I'm building, you know, for the later stage companies that I work with, I'm building a lot of operating models. So how do teams work together to operate efficiently, really with the customer outcome in mind, right? We can't have product and sales and marketing and tech speaking different languages, because that ultimately shows up in the product that we deliver to our customers. So it's really about how teams work together, how we set goals, how those goals translate into roadmaps and action plans. And ultimately, a lot of what I do is building an accountability muscle within the business, which is a really interesting journey. It's more of an art than a science, I would say. There's a lot of frameworks out there. I've used SMART, I've used OKRs. I'm very familiar with, like, you know, all the frameworks, you name them. But every business is different. And so a lot of what I do is really building trust with leaders and bringing a third party objective view to how we are how we are set up for success. How are we naming the things? How are we setting the vision? And how does that translate into the rest of the business? A lot of that is communication and change management and feedback loops between teams and the executives, eliminating the kind of ivory tower mentality that exists in a lot of organizations where, a strategy is set and then it ladders to financial goals and then it ladders to team goals. And then basically, kind of to your point, Lyn, it's the command and control. Okay, go execute against our goals. I haven't seen that work really well in practice for innovative organizations. You really need to have a two-way mechanism for, the teams that are actually working with customers, delivering product to customers. They bring their own set of skills and expertise and give them the latitude to say, hey, where do you think we should go? And how do we marry that with our financial goals? And what are the opportunities, outside of our existing market, and kind of how do we make trade-offs? And so I just mentioned a lot of things, and it's interesting because my whole career, I never really felt like I fit into a box, and I used to kind of be a bit hard on myself. I was like, I wish I was a subject matter expert in something, but that's just not how I work. I see the big picture. I see the entire business, and so it actually can be quite challenging to scope my role to a certain area. And I've really just decided to leverage that as a strength and the capability that I bring into the business, which is I plug the gaps no matter what the gaps are, up until a point where I say, this is a piece of work, or this is a role, and this is something that actually needs to scale with the business. So that just gives you a little bit of flavor of the work that I do.
It's a brilliant oversight and shows the incredible value that you've had at being able to bring your experience at working at different aspects of organisations into being able to help identify how they can become more of a smooth running, well-oiled machine that has the customer at the centre of the future of the organisation. Any organisation that loses sight of the customer and the problems that are evolving and that need to be changed, as customers learn, particularly in tech, learn new things and innovate along with the technology, new opportunities and challenges come up, don't they? So it's always such an extraordinary environment, and to be nimble and so focused on being able to shape and remold and respond to and then learn more, that becomes that incredibly adaptive, nimble learning organisation. And I think that's why a role like yours isn't easy to define, because you are almost exhibiting those kinds of nimble opportunities of evolving in your own right. And I think that's great. And I've seen how you have created a realization that, here is a role that needs to be filled for an organization, because this is something that keeps coming up and we need to have someone really focused and owning that that piece of what we deliver. So, the whole recruiting, I think, is evolving as well. We used to have such structured roles. A lot of those are not even needed. A lot of those roles that we would have thought were key roles in a venture are often outsourced, and they're not the key roles. The key roles are actually more around that design and innovation and delivery piece. So exciting times ahead for you and your business. Jo, I'm just loving it. And I'm very interested in your thoughts around this shift from growth at all costs to a more sustainable approach to growth. I mean, we talked about this when we first started this podcast, and then I'm hearing you saying that investors are wanting 10 times. I mean, that sort of feels like there's a little bit of a tug of war going on there between these kind of philosophies of 10 times. That sounds to me like growth at all costs.
Yeah, it's interesting times, Lyn. If you think about, and this is specific to the venture landscape, I'll speak because that's where my background comes from. Prior to the pandemic, we were in this, as I was saying, capital is flowing. We're willing to throw money at ideas. I mean, mostly in the US, but Australia followed suit relatively quickly. And then obviously 2021, interest rates rising, huge downturn in the market. And all of the sudden, founders and early stage companies are expected to hit these aggressive growth targets, but that didn't account for all of these changes in the market dynamics, right? And because we've inherently become risk averse when there's shifts in these markets, a lot of these companies who then spent and invested a lot in innovation and growth, but didn't necessarily have the revenue to show for it, have really been challenged in raising bridging rounds to then fund the next couple of years of their runway. And so what this has created is a really, really resilient pack of founders and businesses that have survived the last couple of years. And what that's forced them to do is to become capital efficient, to really look at their business and to say, who are our customers? What is the core product that we are delivering? And how do we get in front of those customers and sell only to those customers until we can start to fund our future growth from our own balance sheet? And again, this isn't new like business thinking. This is business 101, right? But we kind of just, we went through this explosive time where we had all of these ideas. This was, pre-generative AI, and it was really, really exciting, this kind of fourth wave tech boom. And now we're really seeing that pull back, especially here in Australia, which is inherently already quite a risk-averse country. You see most of our investment going into mining and property, and it unfortunately inhibits our ability as Australia to get on the map from an innovation perspective. And so coming back to your point, it's almost like a lot of companies are set up for failure in the model because they're, given a limited amount of capital to hit these really, really aggressive growth targets. The market in Australia pretty much taps out at 20 mil in revenue, and then you need to start looking overseas. And now, again, like I've said, we've had this shift where investors are looking for a lot more traction to be able to bring in more funding. And so the narrative, I would say, is one, only raise as much capital as you need. Like, I think founders raise too much capital and they don't know how to deploy it efficiently. And so they invest a lot in marketing and innovation on a number of different verticals instead of really focusing on a specific vertical, a specific problem set, proving that out, and then expanding from there. The other thing I would caution is not everyone is suited for VC money, and not everyone is suited for investment. And so actually, if you can avoid it, I would say build a business plan that doesn't take into account external funding, and look at your finances and see what you're able to achieve, right? How many customers would I need? What would my price point look like to get me to a break-even point in the next 3 years? And I was gonna mention this earlier because I know we've talked a lot about tech, but I have 2 clients that work in the services business, and one, I would say these kind of rapid innovation, iterative cycles, this is not just relevant to tech. Like, these same principles can apply to your service model. It's who do I serve? How do I serve them? How can I make this a well-oiled machine, as you say, Lyn? And in hopes of, you're potentially thinking about your legacy and your future, and how do I exit this business in the next 5 to 10 years? And so growth and operational efficiency and capital efficiency, that still comes into play when a future acquirer is looking at your business and saying, what can I actually buy here? What are the assets? What's the value? So again, to your question, it is unfair. Like, the market that we are in is unfair. But what I would say is show that you have that path to growth, like show that you have the thinking and the steps and the milestones outlined on how you're going to get to that 10x revenue, but know that things are going to change along the way, and just be prepared for that and know how you're going to adapt to that, know kind of what that process is if we need to make a shift. Who needs to be included? How do we communicate it? Who are we going after next? And put the building blocks in place now.
Yeah, incredible opportunities really facing tech and innovation companies. And I know, we do lament in Australia, the limited size of our market, and we do lose a lot of our great innovators overseas. But what are some of the biggest opportunities that you're seeing, Jo?
Ooh, really good question. I don't know where to start. I guess maybe not from an opportunity perspective, but what I would suggest is, people who are going to win in this market right now are those who are focused on vertical solutions. So like I mentioned, targeting a really niche problem set and a really niche buyer. And once you capture and dominate that market, it's a lot easier to build up the feature set of some of these supplementary tools or applications or even services that they're using today to make your product more sticky. But the opportunity right now that we're seeing is really, really in vertical solutions. The last 10 years were a lot more about horizontal applications. So think, ERP, supply chain, entire workflow management tools. But now, especially with the commoditization of AI, you can, go get an agent for this, go get an agent for that. It's quite easy. We're seeing that people, I'm not talking about enterprise, but maybe more on the SMB and mid-market, they're not as averse to trying new tools and having a couple of different tools in their toolkit as long as it adds the value that they expect. And on the topic of AI, like what we're seeing right now with commoditized AI is really it's only solving like 20% of their pain, and it's becoming throwaway. Like they'll try these applications and they won't stick with it. So again, there's a real opportunity to, and we're seeing a lot in the legal space, certain subsets of workforce or tax workflow or task management are getting wiped out by these different solutions. But these teams are okay trying these different applications because right now there isn't something that solves, an entire platform solution need for their teams. So again, opportunity, I think, is in those really like vertical problem spaces. I think we're going to see a lot in the fintech world over the next 10 years. If you think about how global commerce may change, how we're able to really operate as a global economy, I think is going to be really, really interesting, especially in like highly regulated markets like the US, for example, all 50 states. I think we're going to see kind of a reckoning as it comes to fintech and like how we're able to kind of build, especially on blockchain and decentralize a lot of the financial activity that's going on in the space, which will be a huge benefit to Australia. How can we start to get more capital flow into the innovation sector here in Australia? If Australians aren't wanting to invest in Australian businesses, why not let the rest of the world invest in Australian businesses? So I think fintech is going to be a space to watch for sure.
Absolutely, I agree. And it's sort of reminiscent of showing my age of the dot-com boom, There's so much happening. And then it kind of settles, and then the key players will emerge out of the rubble. Exactly. Interesting times ahead, but loads of fun and loads of a part of the fun of all this is the journey. There'll be some winners and there'll be some losers and there'll be some homes lost, but hopefully they're young enough to rebuild as they go again. For those of me looking at the end of my career, I'm not quite as adventurous or risk-taking as I once was. But, so for you, for the aspiring entrepreneurs that we've got tuning in, what's the most common mistakes that you see founders making when they start and scale their business? Obviously, you've talked about that sort of not focusing enough on a niche. Why do you think that, and I hear this so often from founders, but our solution has such a massive, it appeals to everyone.
Yeah.
It's classic, isn't it? Like just trying to get them to focus on a niche, lucrative market where there's a consumer that has the money and the biggest issue that's going to be the early adopter. I mean, just getting everyone to think like that around who are they, who have those deep pockets, that this is the biggest market to go into.
Yeah, I think to the question around like what are the challenges that they run into as they scale, the biggest challenge that I see, especially when it comes to selling into a niche, is messaging and positioning. And if you're trying to be everything to everybody, your message gets diluted and you just become another product that, especially if you're, doing outbound sales, doing cold calling, reaching out directly on LinkedIn, you have to think, like, in this digital world, how many inbound inquiries these individuals are getting, and you have to stand out from the crowd with your messaging and your positioning. And how do you do that? It's you deeply understand someone's problem and their emotional pain as well as their rational pain, and you are coming to the table with a way to solve that. And typically there's three things that buyers care about. It's either return, it's ROI, right? How are you going to increase my revenue? How are you going to decrease my costs? Or how are you going to mitigate my risks? And those are really the three things that you should be pointing your positioning at. And if you're positioning that to 10 different buyers across 10 different industries, it translates into how you sell. It translates into your digital assets. It translates into your brand and how you're perceived in market. It also it inhibits you from actually learning about what your customers are saying once you have the customers. So they're buying the product. They might be buying your services, but what's making it sticky? Why do they stick around? The ones that retain. Another, what I would tell founders who are or business owners who are at the scaling point of their business is all of your answers are actually in your existing customer base. If you're wondering how to grow my business, it is all in your existing customer base. What do they want more of? What do they want less of? What are they using all the time? The ones that leave you, why do they leave? Like, your strategy is sitting in there alongside the market context, right? Like, you need to understand what your competitors are doing. You need to understand what the global context and like where the market is headed, especially for your sector. It may make sense for you to be in APAC. It may not make sense for you to be in North America. Think about those things. But if ever in doubt, like, go back to your customers and segment them, and all the answers are there. So the biggest challenges, I would say, when it comes to scaling are, as you say, Lyn, being everything to everyone or too many things to too many people. The other thing I would say is hiring too quickly. So essentially what does that mean? It's spending, it's burning cash more than you more than you can afford to. So I would think really critically about what are the roles and what types of outcomes do those roles need to achieve in the business. I think a lot of people think about sales really as that key headcount that's, they are incentivized and KPI'd through the business that they bring in, but, also think about the rest of the business and what does it cost you to serve a customer based on the other folks that you have in the business, and are we actually getting the margin? Like, what is that effect on the unit economics of our business? So I would say hiring too quickly is also another common mistake that I see when you're really building up the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that a lot of hires are often made because I think some founders might think by plugging that person in, I'm going to get whatever that other big tech experience was, but without understanding that that person was in a role. They weren't in building out that role. It's really interesting seeing that happen, and then what happens is that person will come and kind of do what they were doing in a big environment, which isn't relevant for being in a scale up or a startup. Yeah, good. And that's why and comes back to why we need a fractional COO on the team. So, I really think you've identified a wonderful problem for you to solve there in startup and scale up land. And I have to ask you, and it's not a part of our plan, but I mean, you're going to be very much in demand. So who is your ideal client, and what kind of founder do you want to work with? I mean, you can be a bit picky and choosy, right, Jo, Robyn?
Oh gosh, Lyn, you're putting me on the spot. My ideal customer profile is any business between seed to Series C, I would say. That's only relevant to the venture and the tech landscape. But, anyone doing probably between, a couple $100,000, maybe $100,000 in revenue to $1 to $2 million in revenue is really my sweet spot. And that's because you've proven that you have a market, you have a product in market, and really it's about how do I now grow the business? How do I scale? How do I get more of these customers? But how do I start to think about my next 100 customers and my next 1,000 customers? And what's the team that I need to be able to deliver that to our customers? And so I fit really well with the, let's set up for growth and scale, potentially thinking about bringing more funds into the business in the next 18 months. And we really need to prove out our business model, our operating capability. Team size is probably over 10 employees. I could do the early stage. I have a couple of early stage clients, which I love. But my sweet spot really is taking something that's starting to work and then making it grow and making it operate really, really efficiently. It also gives me the opportunity to really up level the team. Like, I would say what I love to do is building and designing operating models, and I'm on the ground with the team. I'm learning what the capabilities are. I'm almost kind of like moving the puzzle pieces around. What I love is, you kind of alluded to this earlier, Lyn, when we were speaking about talent, where there's so much more room for individuals that have these horizontal skill sets because of the pace and the rate at which the market is changing and businesses are changing and we're innovating. And I mean, there are obviously natural verticals within a business, like, software engineering, marketing is a little bit more fluid. I would say actually engineering, data science, anything a bit more technical, that's pretty cut and dry that you need to have certain skill sets. But we're seeing people now in these growth roles, head of growth roles, where they have sales and marketing and product marketing chops, and they're really malleable to the different types of customers, to the different channels. They can leverage partnerships and networking. And so I love to really get an understanding of the team and their skill sets and figure out where they can have the biggest impact across the business. And that also, that comes down to an individual's personal motivations and their own values and why they want to show up to work every day as well. So it's not necessarily just, okay, coming into the business and saying, how are we going to grow, 10x, or do we need to cut costs? It's really bringing in the values of the business and the growing of the team. And, you really want, again, no matter what stage of business you are, whether you're a tech business, whether you're a small business owner, like, you want your employees to show up and bring their best selves to work and be motivated. And you also want to be getting the best out of them. And they do that when they're able to leverage the skill sets that they have in the right roles with the right level of support. So I would say, a couple of team members, have a product in market, selling to customers, but we really just need to figure out how we accelerate what we're doing, and make the right next big bets.
Well, I know that whoever you work with are going to get absolute value and wonderful support and insights by having you in their corner. You've had this incredible career, and you've also been able to make time for the activities that you love. I know you love Pilates and outdoor adventures. How do you maintain that balance, and why is it so important to you? I know it has always been important to you since I've known you.
Thanks, Lyn. I'm glad that it shines through. Speaking transparently, so I mentor a lot of women in tech, especially women that are looking to make career transitions into tech. And a lot of these women come from, really incredibly pedigrees, legal backgrounds, finance backgrounds, but they've climbed the corporate ladder and they've just realized that they want to be in a business where they can see they're having an impact. And I love being able to mentor them through that career journey. And I'm really transparent with the fact that I've burned myself out a number of times throughout my career. And it's part of being, we won't get into my upbringing here, but, naturally a little bit of an overachiever, highly productive, probably a little bit of high functioning anxiety in the workplace. And I've gone through a couple of challenging periods in my life where I really, really burnt out. And it was actually during COVID. I'm sure a lot of other people had, times where I just realized work was my identity. My profession, my career was my identity. And as much as I loved it, I didn't feel like I had anything else to really ground myself on. And I won't say where I was working at the time, but I tried to quit my job. And my boss was like, please don't leave. Well, we can't have you leave. Like, tell me what you want. I'll give you whatever you want. And I said, okay, I want to move to 3 days a week because I need 2 days a week to figure out what I'm passionate about. And he said yes. And like, one, I couldn't believe he said yes. And so for anyone who's looking for some words of wisdom and just needs maybe a push to find some courage, you can't receive if you don't ask. Like, that's a big lesson that I've learned over the last number of years, especially as a woman in the workplace. Oftentimes it's my own fear that's getting in the way of me going after or asking for what I want. So anyway, I asked for those 3 days a week to work, 2 days off. And that's when I went and got my Pilates teacher certification, because I love doing Pilates. And it was just a different part of my brain as someone who had been working in tech for so long. Having something that's like I'm working with clients hands-on, palpating, and you see an immediate sense of impact with clients. Like, I finally found something where I felt, okay, like this is kind of giving me a different sense of reward and achievement. Yes, I have my career, and that takes a little bit of time to manifest, but here's something that gives back to me and fills my cup. And ever since then, like, being balanced and making sure that I'm centered it's the most important thing to me. Like, I know that if I'm feeling stressed, or if I don't get my workouts in, or if I don't get time to myself, I'm not showing up for myself as my best self, and I'm not showing up for my employees. I'm not showing up for my clients. I'm not showing up for my family. And so, taking care of yourself is number one. Always will be a big proponent of that. I'm not a parent, and so I give so much credibility and so much, love and gratitude for the parents out there that are parenting and working and having to look out for themselves. So kudos to you guys. I don't know how you do it, but for me, yeah, it's just been really a prominent theme in my life.
Yeah, well, you've always been an inspiration to us, Jo. You always are so honest, and we've loved being a part of your journey since we met you so many years ago. And to see you now stepping out and starting up your own business, it's fantastic. Clearly, you've got some great clients already, got some capacity for some more, I'm sure. So no doubt you will be hit up by people who are listening to you through this podcast show. Thank you so much for carving out the time in San Francisco. It's evening over there. I'm sure you're exhausted after a big day.
Nah.
A big day out there supporting your founder. Thanks for being on the show and keep in contact.
Oh, it's been amazing. Thanks for having me, Lynn. I've just loved planning for this, loved every minute of it, love BWA. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Please feel free to reach out to me, even just for a chat or for advice. Like, I love, sharing my wisdom. I think, to be honest, our next generation of innovation is going to come from our existing generations giving back to those communities. We have to help each other out. There's so much experience and knowledge to be taken. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jo, Robyn. And for those of you who are tuned into the Business Women Australia podcast show, thanks for being with us today. If you're thinking about becoming a member, please head to our website. There's all sorts of information on there about joining. There's a calendar of events. You can see what's coming up, or reach out to me, lyn@businesswomenaustralia.com.au. We're across all states, across professions, across different sectors. And we would love to see you online. We meet on the last Thursday of every month. Otherwise, we might have an event coming up in your local area. So check us out and get engaged. Thank you so much, Jo. We'll get you back on. Don't disappear. I want to chat to you when we finish our stream before you go to bed.
You never know why Lynn wants to chat to you later.
Always do. Okay, thanks people for listening, and we'll see you at a Business Women Australia event coming your way very shortly. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
You have been listening to the Business Women Australia podcast show. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode and gained some valuable insights to empower you on your journey. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to stay updated in our latest episodes. And if you're not already a member of Business Women Australia, what are you waiting for? Head to our website today and join so that you can connect with a thriving community of inspiring women across Australia. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.